We're going to try to do something, L'zecher Nishmas Rabbi Morgan Zt'l, to share with his Rebbitzin and to share with the children and grandchildren our memories of someone that meant a lot to each and every one of us. I myself didn't have the intimate relationship that all of his Talmidim, that all of his students had with him. My relationship goes back with Rabbi Morgan, Makor HaChaim, quite a few years. And as Makor HaChaim was developing, and I saw that the men were growing in their learning and their passion for learning, it became very obvious that they needed to go to the next level. And I think Mark Lippman was maybe one of the initiators of the shir, but the men felt that if they could start learning more in depth and understanding what the words of the Gemara were and what the message is, how to understand the Gemara, how to learn the back and forth, the Shankavataria, everything that goes on, then they could excel in their learning, not only in Gemara, but it would make a major impact on all areas of their learning and their davening and their avodas Hashem. And I had my eye on Rabbi Morgan for quite a few years. At the time, I was learning every morning in the Kollel of Los Angeles, and I would see Rabbi Morgan sit there for hours on end with a spectrum of different chavrusas every single day, from the affiliated to the unaffiliated, to the older to the younger, to the middle-aged, to the Baal Tshuva, to the one who didn't even know what it meant to be a Jew, to the one that was black and white in the hat that just wanted some extra inspiration in his learning. And out of the corner of my eye in the Kollel, I kept watching Rabbi Morgan with this unbelievable hana, this satisfaction, and this pleasure that he had from learning with each and every person that would sit down in front of him. And it was with enthusiasm, even though sometimes 3 chavrusas in a row, he would learn the exact same thing. Whether it was Bava Metzia, Eila Metzias, or Bava Kama, somewhere, some parak there, or it was Brachas, he was learning the exact same thing, sometimes for hours on end, same words, same explanation, same everything, but with each and every one of your chavrusas, it was with the same energy and the same passion and the same geschmack that he had. And I thought to myself, this is someone that the Chevra Makor HaChaim would really appreciate learning with. And we spoke, and he was very happy to do it. The travel time between the city and the valley wasn't what he was excited about, but he said to me, if there's people that want to learn and they're going to be enthusiastic and excited about it, I'm willing to make the long schlep from the valley to the city. And he used to drive, he used to leave very early to make sure that he would be there always on time, always on time. He would always ask me what the traffic was like. Was it heavy today? Was it not heavy today? And he would leave accordingly to make sure that he would be there so that at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, Rabbi Morgan shir was ready to start no matter what. And it was really love at first sight for all of the chevra, for all the guys that were there. Rabbi Morgan brought an element and a whole new angle to learning and to Gemara and to opening up their minds and their hearts to things that they didn't even know existed before. He had a very special technique that resonated with everybody in the shir, and the men that really worked and they stayed to it. And even though they didn't see themselves moving so far along in the Gemara itself, but they realized that internally they were moving worlds from where they were when they first sat down with him. And I think after 6 or 7 years of learning the Rabbi Morgan, they finished 6 daf in Eila Metzias, and those 6 dafim are probably worth many mesechtas that other people would learn on the fly like this, because they put in the blood, the sweat, and the tears. And many Tuesday evenings, I would be sitting in my office while they were learning, and I would hear Rabbi Morgan going with the same enthusiasm every single week. First word, second line on the second line, this, blah, 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 back and forth. Rashi says, this one says, Rav Amar, Bai Amar, and he gives a taich, this. Joe, what do you say? Bob, what do you say? Mark, what do you say? Mark, what do you say? And I would hear him say it, and he would give it over, and there was such an excitement in that room, and there was such an energy that was in that room. And these men are the great beneficiaries of everything that Rabbi Morgan put into them, how much he cared about them. When somebody would come and try out the shir, he would get so excited that he was going to offer somebody a taste of Gan Eden. And they would come sometimes once, they would come sometimes twice, and very often it would fizzle away after a few shim. And he would come to me and say, what happened? What happened to that guy? How come he didn't come back? He couldn't understand. If you're offering Gan Eden and you're offering the greatest pleasure in life, how could it be that a person wouldn't come back to that shir again and again and again? But Baruch Hashem, over the years, there was a core group of guys that went week in and week out, and they chazed over. Not even everybody that's in the shir is on this Zoom right now. Some of them weren't able to make it, and hopefully they'll send messages later. But it was week in and week out with dedication, with excitement, with enthusiasm, with his smile and his warmth and his love and his belief that the Torah itself is the greatest way that a person will connect to themselves and to the mitzvahs and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, everybody should have a schus, everybody should have an opportunity to learn in the right way. And that's what he did. My last conversation I told the Rebbitzin that I had with Rabbi Morgan was standing here in the doorway of my office, and we were making a siyum on Masech the brachas of Daf Yomi. And it was clear to all of us that Rabbi Morgan was not a very big fan of Daf Yomi because you go very quickly, you don't read everything, you don't understand everything, it just moves and moves and moves and moves and moves. And Rabbi Morgan, of course, is the man who relentlessly put all of his energy into his Talmidim that they should sit on a word and sit on a commentary and understand the back and the forth and can't even move on until you understand it clearly. So I knew that he wasn't a big fan of Daf Yomi, but I also knew that most of the men that were in Daf Yomi Shir were all of his Talmidim. So I said, Rabbi Morgan, we just made a siyum on Masech the brachas in Daf Yomi. And Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. I said, I want you to know that most of the men that are coming to the Daf Yomi Shir, they're all your Talmidim. He said, yeah. I said, but I want you to know something. I said, I know that maybe Rabbi Morgan doesn't hold the Daf Yomi is the best thing in the world. I said, but you should see your Talmidim sitting in that shir, finger on the page, with their eyes focused on the Gemara, reading every single word that is there, understanding everything that is going on. They ask questions that a seasoned professional of Gemara learning would ask. When I read a Rashi, I read a Tosfos, I watch their eyes go over to the side of the page and they follow along with me and they get it. I said, Rabbi Morgan, if it wouldn't have been for all the years and the energy and the effort that you put into them, it's impossible that they would be able to appreciate or to be following through the pages one day after the other. So I said, that's your schos. And that gave him a big smile on his face. And that was really our last interaction, that Rabbi Morgan knew, as he already knew for many, many, many years, that the impact that he had in his Talmidim was enormous. It was gigantic. It was life-altering. It was life-changing. And everybody that learned by him will never, ever be the same in their Gemara. The greatest loss that I feel that we have for ourselves here at Makor HaChaim is there's no one that will ever be able to replicate a shir the way that Rabbi Morgan gave the shir, his style, his technique, that he was mechadish on his own, that nobody else, I think, in the entire world has such a beautiful approach to understanding Gemara and teaching Torah, and nobody else could give it over the way that Rabbi Morgan could. I joked with the Rebbitzin on the phone the other day that I'm trying to think who's going to give the shir, and the only one that I can think of is Rebbitzin Morgan herself, because she knows his technique and she knows his learning better than anybody else. And she told me after a few moments of laughter and silence, she says, Taka, I think I could give the shir if I needed to. So we'll see who's going to end up giving the shir, but whatever it's going to be, those 7 years are indelibly engraved in the minds and the hearts and the soul of all of his Talmidim, all of his students. I don't want to take away any more time because I believe that they have much more to offer of the insights and the memories of Rabbi Morgan. This is the month of Nisan, which is a month where there's no eulogies. So we're not eulogizing at this moment, but rather we are sharing with the Rebbetzin and all of her illustrious children and grandchildren our most important and dear memories that we have of Rabbi Morgan. So without any further ado, I'll turn the screen over to Mark Lippman, who was very adamant that we make such a special gathering like this in honor of the memory of Rabbi Morgan Zt'l. And here is Mark Lippman.
I thought it might be, I knew it would be difficult to remember the great presence that Rabbi Morgan had in our life, but I already feel that it's going to be more difficult than we could imagine to not have the rabbi with us. But he was obviously a very, very special person. He made a huge impact on the lives of everyone that he came across. But more important than his learning, there was a personal connection, there was a humanity, there was a human element that he had, which in the days that we live in now is more important than anything, that you can develop a connection on a human level with a person which has tremendous value, and you feel that he gets you, you get him, you appreciate what each one has got to say, and you appreciate each other's being together. And that's the kind of presence that he had. He was very specific and very adamant in the way that he taught. It took a lot of patience, and we could go on for hours about the stories about how it seemed that any human being would have broken under the pressures that we put on him by giving him a blank look after 7 years and said, what is that thing you mentioned about a lost object? Is that pertinent to this Elu something? And he just looked and he went right back to starting from the beginning, and we could not faze him. He had a tremendous presence and he was such a value. I'm just reading a book about the World Expo in Chicago in 1893. It was an expo, it was unbelievable, and the greatest engineers and architects of the world came together to create this expo. The first thing they realized is that the ground that they had to build this spectacular presentation, unbelievable buildings, that the ground was weak and it was shaky, and that anything that they envisaged building on that ground would inevitably sink. It would stand briefly, temporarily, and then it would crumble and fall. And they had to engineer unusual and revolutionary devices to stabilize the ground that they would build the buildings on before they could go further. And I think that's what Rabbi Morgan did in his teaching. He realized that to shoot through Gemara and all the other learnings and the things that we're exposed to without having some stabilizing the ground that we build on, it would have temporary and fleeting benefit. And I think that he was definitely successful in creating that grounding. And so although we've lost him physically, he's with us absolutely forever, because there's not a word of Gemara that we will ever learn that will not be touched with the influence that he had on us. And to his family, I just have to thank everyone for sharing him with us. It was not his favorite. He was not built for the road. He was not built for traveling, and yet he pushed himself. And if ever I had any regrets, it's just forcing him to endure what was obviously an uncomfortable thing for him to travel every week. But I believe, as Rabbi Horowitz said, that he did get that satisfaction of seeing just how important it was. When we approached the holidays, which we're approaching now, he had more of an impact on us than anything else, because he would lean back, he would break from his routine, and he'd say, it's very special time coming up now, and you should know. And he would have told us, this is no joke. It's the time of redemption. It's the time of Mashiach, and that our actions in this world are only temporary, but it's going to affect the Olam Haba, and it's important that we all understand the bigger picture. So he had an unbelievable impact. We're going to miss him physically, but he's going to be with us forever. And we really appreciate the fact that the family shared him with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. We'll go to I think, the first of the group of Talmidim, to Bob Linder, who was in this year from beginning, in the first year until the last year.
I want to thank Mark for dumping that out the way he just did. On the other hand, he's now opened the floodgates for the rest of us. Thank you very much, Mark. Rebbitzin, there's a lot to say. Your husband was an amazing addition, contribution to our lives. And so I've got about 3 or 4 points, and I'll try to make them all. Forgive me if I'm looking down a little bit. I wanted to start with the 14-minute video that I think you and your family could just cherish, because it was so accurate, it was so spot on. In the first 30 seconds, I believe the videographer did a marvelous job of capturing a question, I think, from Danny Hill, who I know through Esha Torah, to your husband, to your father and grandfather, Rabbi Morgan. And Rabbi Morgan says so eloquently, he says, what we can do is we can imagine ourselves watching Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi doing for the first time what no Jew had done before him, and as he's writing down the word of God, and his quill would have been shaking if we were watching him. So you can imagine us hearing that 2,200 years later as our representative. Who knows if he wasn't the reincarnated Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, that we're watching your husbands conveying over the oral law of Torah to us schleppers. I speak for myself. And that was just a massive point that I don't think any of us ever missed with any one of his classes, that we were hearing the word of God through your husband, which is, I think, basically says it all. I think everyone should share their version of our opening moments every week with your husband, as we kind of see each other, Mark Libman, Mark Rauch, Dr. Joe, David, the whole group, Ben, and we get together and we'd be schmoozing a little bit from 8 o'clock. We try to push that to 8:15 and maybe delay class by a few minutes. And Rabbi Morgan had his unique way of shouting at us, okay, let us begin. And we would be shocked. And even though we knew it was coming every time. And I think Rabbi Morgan made us each feel that we were his personal favorite student. And I think we all felt that, except I just want to share with you, I know he told it to everybody, but I know for a fact that I was his personal favorite student. We coined the phrase, someone who shall remain nameless, as we creeped along and without even realizing it after 8.5 years, that our skills, in fact, were growing and progressing at an accelerated rate, to the point, as Rabbi Horowitz just shared, that somehow we found ourselves in a Daf Yomi class, which was it's just phenomenal to think back. We had no business being in that class 8.5 years ago. And now suddenly, Baruch Hashem, I can follow along and I can read, and I think I get about 70% of a line each time for Rabbi Horowitz adds that, of course, there's new words to learn. But we affectionately referred to your class. There's Daf Yomi classes, and there's detailed learning in the yeshivas, and this class we referred to as our Daf a Decade, because that seemed like our pace, but our growth exceeded that tremendously. A couple phrases that I remember Rabbi teaching us was, Rabbi Horowitz, you'll correct me, Kula de Alma, that everyone agrees, the whole world, the Olam, the whole world agrees. And we're thinking, well, whenever I'm making an argument against anyone in court or whatever, I should just use that. The whole world agrees, because if I've got the world behind me, then who could disagree? And then lo and behold, after making this incredibly bold statement that the Gemara teaches us, then Rabbi Abayak would come back and say, pleading, I disagree. So lo and behold, when the whole world agrees, there's going to be a yid that doesn't quite agree. Salka the Ikas and those phrases, all we were exposed to, and they were earth-shattering and life-changing, because this is the way that we learn God's Torah. Dr. Joe and I had shared a moment with every compliment that Rabbi Morgan would give he or me, he or I. And your dad, your husband, your grandfather had a unique hierarchy that you had to be a student of his for 8 years to realize how that hierarchy of compliment worked. And if someone read, without obviously preparing, he would say, okay, good. And we'd move on. And the reader who received that backhanded compliment knew we hadn't prepared. And then he'd go with, oh, very good, very good. And he'd go to, that was level 2. And then you might get an excellent. How can you exceed an excellent? And Mark Rauch will tell you there was one word that even exceeded excellent, and that was gewaldig. And we waited for that day when we might get a gewaldig. And over the course of 8.5 years, I'm not proud to tell you that I've got one, and I cherish it. Mark Rauch, I count, he's got 11, and I'm quite jealous of his gewaldigs. We were pursuing our life. Our Tuesday nights would not be complete unless we got a gewaldig, and that was not often. Dr. Joe was personally insulted when he got an excellent. He wanted more. Let me just take one little look. I'll just read you my last notes. I took a lot of notes during every class. March 3rd, 2020 was our last class with your husband, your father. Version 2, it was version 1 from Reb Mori, Tada decided, and version 2. On version 2, this is it. Here he says, why is it the Rabbanim find place, makom, is not a good sign? Sounds like Rabbi Nachman now. And I just think, I'll finish the thought, makom is never good. So I take that to mean, first of all, the reference to your husband's first name is shocking. And that makom is never good, I take to mean where you're holding right now is not enough. It's not good enough, never good enough. And it imposes upon us an obligation to continue our learning, whether it's the Rebbitzin, all those in favor say I or anyone else, or in our Daf Yomi, or in our personal Ishtadlus, our personal growth, that we've got an assignment here in this world to improve and to grow. And your husband just took us 10 rungs up the ladder rather than a baby step, that one at a time, and we are forever indebted to him. And I'll leave you with my very last thought, which are endless thoughts actually, but for today's purposes. When we started this process 8.5 years ago, I think I could give you the date in 2011 and 2012. And again, I thank Mark a number of times. I'll thank him publicly for having this great idea, and Rabbi Horowitz with identifying the perfect person to fill that need for us. Some people grow out of their Rebbe, I guess, after first grade. You get a new Rebbe in second grade and a new Rebbe in third grade. Your husband was our first grade Rebbe, second grade, third grade, but he became a Rav. His stories to us, his teaching right before Purim or right before Yom Kippur, I won't bore you with repeating the story, but it's done very nicely in the 14-minute video about us giving us an assignment in Yom Kippur where we're all trembling for our lives. Yom Hadin just occurred, and now we got one more shot at it. He encouraged us to bring our notebook, to bring our machberet, and sit it next to us during tefillah. Who thinks about that kind of thing? That we should realize in our own way that we have made some changes, and makom was never enough. And he told us to pat on it and to touch it and to look at it during our tefillah and Yom Kippur, that we've accomplished something. His last comment to me that I recall, I apologize if I've taken up too much time. When we started this 8.5 years ago, my Hebrew writing was terrible. I couldn't even read my own Hebrew writing. I was incredibly slow. My Hebrew speaking somehow was okay, but Hebrew writing was poor. And then I think it was on March 3rd, it might have been a week before that, he gave us our usual 15 or 20 words with some double ups. And for whatever reason, I wrote it down at a pace, put my pen down, looked at the clock, and he says, "Bob, are you through with the words?" I was like surprised at the question. Why else would I put my pen down? "Yeah, Rabbi, I'm through." And he shook his head. He says, "Man, have you grown?" He says, "I remember when it would take, 10, 15 minutes at 8.5 years ago." And so what a wonderful last thought of his, that in his eyes, he thought that I had grown. I'll pass the torch now back to Mark, the rabbi, and thank you for hearing me ramble on.
Thank you very much, Bob. We're going to go to one of the next senior members of the class who was with us for a very, very long time. And Rabbi Morgan and Dr. Sandler had a very, very special, beautiful relationship with each other. It was a common respect that they had of one another. Rabbi Dr. Sandler for the Talmud Chacham, and Rabbi Morgan appreciated his medical advice. And it was really beautiful for me to watch the two of them over the years. So we'll ask Rabbi Sandler to share his memories.
I'm here, and the first impression that I had when I went into the class, which was close to about 10 years ago, 9 years ago, was that I went to yeshiva, and the Rebbeim, you were always ashamed to ask any question. Is it going to be a silly question? Is it going to be a kind of a thing that you're ashamed to ask? It's not nice. With Rabbi Morgan, you can ask anything. At first, I was able to ask any question about anything that even stepped out of what the learning was. And the thing that I had about Rabbi Morgan, that he sees an old geezer like me, and he did not want to stress me. He said, "Okay, Joe, you're next." "Oh, my Rabbi, thank you. Very good, very good." He had sensitivity. Maybe I'll get nervous. Maybe I'll forget something. Das ist ein Mensch. Das ist ein Mensch. Zu Gott und zu Leid. Zu Gott und zu Leid. And I can't say any more. I don't want to bore you. Oh, Azaydas. There should be a Hashem should be with him.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Joe. And we're going to go to one of the other senior members of the Shir, who is really also from, I think, almost from the very first of the classes, and that is our dear friend, Mark Rauch.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll try and add as much as I can. So much has already been said, but always looked forward to our Tuesday nights when Rabbi, by the way, Rebbitzin Morgan, thank you for sharing your husband with us and allowing him to drive to Makor every Tuesday night. His neshama should have an aliyah. And he's really going to be sorely missed by a lot of people. I remember Tuesday nights, I would always look forward to his, as Bob Linder mentioned, his battle cry, "Okay, it's Tuesday." And in his loving and his caring and his focused and his funny way, he was funny. He'd always ask us, all right, is it a question, an answer, or a statement? And we'd all say, question. He'd look at us and he'd nod, question. And he'd go, no, statement. It's always pretty funny. Rabbi Morgan, he developed a system to teach and to nurture guys like myself that raised our family in a Torah-centric manner, but never had the opportunity to go to yeshiva. And there were a group of us, as Rabbi Horowitz had mentioned, that, and thank you, Mark Littman, for having the idea. We wanted to learn how to learn Gemara, and Rabbi Horowitz knew Rabbi Morgan and asked him, and thank God he agreed, and the rest is history. He took guys like us, he taught us the skills on how to read. We all knew conversational Hebrew to a certain extent, but he taught us biblical Hebrew, how to read biblical Hebrew without the vowels, how to translate the Gemara in the Gemara way. He used his term he didn't like to Englishise the translation, as I won't mention the company that puts out another Gemara, but he didn't like that company. He taught us comprehension skills. He was a surgeon. He was an expert. He was very skilled at taking guys like us. There's a vast array of Torah, Shell, Bobhead, and Rabbi Morgan allowed us to learn the skills to give us a certain level of independence. He taught us the question and answer process, which is central to learning Gemara. He gave us the inside skills, which is a gift. I remember in class, he was such a loving guy. He would say, okay, Mordechai. He called me Mordechai. I loved it. Loved that he called me Mordechai. Can you read? So I'd take the blot and I'd read it, struggle through reading it, struggle through the translation, struggle through the comprehension. It was painfully obvious that I didn't study that week like I should have studied. And as soon as I done, Mark, gewaldig, excellent, gewaldig. He was just a very special person, very sensitive to taking guys that were always somewhat envious from afar that, our kids, thank God we were able to send our kids to yeshiva. They became masters at learning Gemara. We'd see people like learning in chavrusas in our kollel, and a little jealous from afar that we couldn't participate. He gave us that opportunity to participate, and now we're all fully, after 8.5 years, now we're very much immersed in learning Torah, and it's been a big blessing. And I wanted to thank everybody for being a part of the class, and thank again Rebbitzin Morgan for allowing Rabbi Morgan to come teach us. And as Mark Littman said, we're never going to learn Torah, Gemara, any other sefer again without Rabbi Morgan being a part of that in our mindset. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mordechai. Thank you. We're gonna go now to one of the members who joined the shir later on in the process, And he felt that it was so compelling to be one of the students of Rabbi Morgan. They would come every week from North Hollywood, and he schlepped a lot of other people from North Hollywood in over the years as well, because it was such a vital part of his week. So we'll ask bschuraytz to speak.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz. Rebbitzin Morgan, I just again want to reiterate, as others have done so eloquently, how eternally grateful I am to your husband, of blessed memory, for what he gave to us all. I joined this year about 5 years ago, thanks to Bob Blinder. He told me about this wonderful shir. Bob had left a chasana that we were both attending. He disappeared and he came back. And I said, "Where'd you go?" He says, "I have this shir that I just don't want to miss." He says, "You should try it." So I did, and I was hooked. Your husband was just remarkable. All the things that have been said by the other members of the Chavura and Rabbi Horowitz together about his sensitivity and his way to explain things and just the joy. I looked so forward to that. And I remember our last shiur, March 3rd. It was the week before Purim. And I spoke with him, and he was energetic as always. And I mentioned to him I was going to be traveling for the next 2 weeks. And he wished me well. And I was very, of course, when I got news about things, I certainly was davening for his well-being. And then something that struck me, I didn't know that he was a Levi, but I came across something written, not my words, recently, that in the concluding Sedra of the Torah, Parshas V'zos HaBracha, Moshe Rabbeinu gives a bracha to Klal Yisrael, and for the tribe of Levi, which your husband is from, he said that they will teach Torah and they will place, Torah's incense on the Mizbeach. And may Hashem bless their resources and favor the work of their hands. And, some interpret that bless their resources to be rich. I think Rabbi Morgan's resources were blessed incredibly, because really, I think, again, not my words, but as it says, bless his resources. In Hebrew, chelo means his power and his energy. And Rabbi Morgan's power and energy was incredible. And I still feel it. I hope to carry it on. And I hope you carry it on. And I, again, thank you very, very much. And we'll, his legacy is incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And now for the final memories over here from the Yeshiva Brooklyn boy who lives in Los Angeles, who always gets excited by learning. But I will tell you that the biggest smile on his face in learning are the shiurim that he had with Rabbi Morgan. So it's a pleasure to ask Reb Dovid to say his words.
Rebbitzin, we were lucky enough to have Shabbat twice a week, because every Tuesday night, and for some of his students Thursday night, we would come to this table that we knew how it was going to be set. We knew exactly what the meal was going to be. And we all couldn't wait to take part of it. I think of what Mark said about your husband. I was reading that about the Makor HaChaim this morning, about people that actually go through their lives, but always believing that Mashiach is right around the corner. And we got that from your husband. And what Bob said before, about Yehuda HaNasi holding the quill in his hand, we could actually see your husband relating that as a first-person account, as if he was there himself. Your husband made me feel like a 12-year-old. Joe Sandler and I are from New York, and we both felt like little kids in a shiur, sitting there learning word by word by word. And I think of all the great Rabbanim I read about, and none of them wanted to really be remembered as a Rav, but they wanted to be remembered as a Melamed. And he was a Melamed to the core. And if there's something that all of us uniquely will share, that most people won't, is that we know that Rav Bibi isn't Rav Bibi, is Rav Vavoy. And we hold that, and that's something special to us. But sometimes the greatest memories happen outside of the class. And for me, it's a story that I share over and over and over again. It's when he invited us to your house for a meal. And I think it was Sudat Purim. I could be wrong. Whatever it was the students from his Thursday night class, and it was our Tuesday night class. And we came there like doppelgangers. We looked at each other and we almost saw our mirror images of each other. It was very interesting, with pictures of the rabbis all around your wall. We all sat down to a meal. Your husband was at the head of the table, and he looks at us and he said, "I want to thank you." And he went on 4 times to thank you, the Rebbitzin, for everything you prepared for us, and the house and the meal. He didn't thank us, the schleppers, as Bob calls us. He didn't thank us, he thanked you. And we thank you for sharing him and everything about him. Thank you so much.
We just wanted to share all of our memories, which will always be inside of us and will have a very big impact on all of his Talmidim for the rest of their lives. I just want to close. The Gemara tells us, famous Maisa, the famous story, I believe Rabbi Preda, who had a certain Talmud, he had a certain student who didn't have such a great head in learning. And he used to have to learn with him each and every time they would sit down together, which seems from the Gemara was like every day they learned. In order to give over and impart one word of Torah, it took Rav Preda 400 times to say it over and review it to make sure that the Talmud heard it. One time Rav Preda walked into his learning session and he was a little bit preoccupied, and he told the student, I'm in a bit of a rush today, I have someplace that I have to go. And as he's telling over 100 times, 200 times, 300 times, they get to 400. And Rav Preda says, "No, so you have it?" And he says, "No, I didn't get it today." And Rav Preda said, "I don't understand. Every other day, 400 times is the magic number. How come you don't have it today?" He said, "Because when you walked in, you said that you were busy, you were running someplace. I got very distracted. I thought you were going to leave it any minute. I couldn't pay attention." So Rav Preda sat back down, and as if nothing else in the world existed, he taught that Talmud another 400 times the Gemara, and he said, "Do you have it now?" The Talmud said, "Yes, I have it." He said, "Okay, good. I have to leave now. I'll come back tomorrow." I always wondered from this Gemara, is it that Rav Preda had a tremendous amount of patience and anivus and humility that he was able to just lower himself to the level of the Talmud at that moment and give it over another 400 times? But I think from Rabbi Morgan, there's something else that we learn. Yes, Rabbi Morgan was from the humble, from the Anavim, Mikol Adam Al Pnei Adam, he was the most humble of all people. And he was the most patient of all people. But when you love Torah so much, and you believe in Torah so much, and you honestly believe with all of your heart and all of your soul that the greatest thing that you can share with another Jew is even one word of Torah, and you'll work on it for 8 years to make sure that they understand it. So then whether it's 100 times or 400 times or many, many, many nights, one after the other, you're not in a rush, you're not running any place, you might not be moving so far down the daf, turning so many folios of Shas. But if you can impart one extra word of Torah to another Jew, that's the greatest schus, the greatest merit that a person has in this world. And just as Rabbi Preda was willing to sit for another 400 times because he knew for this Talmud to understand, no one teaching that he had for that day was irreplaceable, and that he couldn't walk away from the session of learning unless he heard the words of Torah. Rabbi Morgan spent each and every night that he gave the shir, giving over with all of his heart and all of his soul and all of his might the beautiful Masorah, the beautiful transmission that we have from Har Sinai. He was the link in the chain for so many of his Talmidim, that they should have their own connection, that they should also be able to sit by Har Sinai. And that's why Rav Morgan would tell the Talmidim before Shavuos, yeah, you're going to go to Shiurim and you're going to drink your coffee, you're going to eat your cheesecake. But you should make sure that you have a time that you sit together as the Shir and you chazer over, you review the teachings, the learning that we did in the Gemara, because that's your ultimate schus. That's your ultimate merit that you have, because that's your connection to the Masorah HaTorah, to Har Sinai. So we can never thank you, Rebbe Morgan, enough for sharing your husband on those long Tuesdays where he had to leave the house early and come home late, and all of the siyumim that we made over here in the valley where you would come and stand by his side and with such a nachas and such a pleasure and get such a joy from seeing the guys in the shir be able to recite 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 lines of Gemara and understand it. And the honor and the cover that we accorded to your husband for being a Rebbe of Torah to this generation. May his memory be a schus. May he be a Melitz Yosher up on high with so many Yisurim that are going on in the world right now. Go to the Kisei HaKavod and ask Hashem to end all the suffering and only give peace and nachas and refuah to the world. And Bez Hashem will all be reunited with our Rebbe once again with the Bias Goyal Tzedek B'Meir Rav Yameinu.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz. Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much, Rebbitzin. What a great honor it was for us to have him as our Rav for the last 8.5 years. Should stand you both in extremely good stead.